Something is happening in Canada that almost nobody is talking about, and honestly, it might be one of the biggest infrastructure moves this country has made in decades. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a quiet but massive plan unfolding in the Canadian North, one that involves icebreakers, railways, pipelines, and a port that most Canadians couldn't even point to on a map. And the reason it's suddenly getting serious attention? A guy named Donald Trump. When Trump started making noise about annexing Greenland, something shifted in Ottawa. Canadian leaders, who had been cautiously watching from the sidelines, suddenly started paying very close attention to their own Arctic backyard. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew stepped forward and reminded the country of something that had been sitting there all along. There is only one port and one rail line that feeds Canada's Arctic. Just one, and it's not in Ontario. It's not in British Columbia. It's in Churchill, Manitoba, a small town of about 900 people sitting on the edge of Hudson Bay. He called it Canada's only hope if things with Trump and Greenland ever got truly serious. And that moment kind of lit a fire under something that had been smoldering for years. So here's where it gets really interesting. The federal government, through Prairies Economic Development Canada, has launched what's called a market-sounding study, essentially a large-scale consultation with senior executives across mining, energy, potash, grain, and Arctic resupply industries. They want to know, if we transform Churchill into a world-class port, would the private sector actually use it? Would it change their supply chains? Would it drive investment? The federal government has put up nearly $250,000 to fund this study, with results expected in 2026. Now, $250,000 sounds small, right? But what that money is studying is anything but small. The project they're examining is called Port of Churchill Plus, and it was formally recognized on the federal government's list of transformative infrastructure strategies back in September 2025. It has 4 major components, and each one is more significant than the last. First, upgrading the Hudson Bay Railway to Class 1 standards, which means heavier loads, faster speeds, and the ability to handle the kind of bulk commodity export that modern global trade demands. Second, dedicated marine icebreaking capacity to extend the port's shipping season, which is currently only about 4 months a year. Third, an all-weather road connecting Churchill to the provincial highway network, because right now, Churchill has no road connection at all. Every single person, every piece of equipment, every food item that arrives in Churchill comes by rail or by plane. There is no road. None. And fourth, a new energy corridor, which might actually be the most commercially explosive piece of the entire puzzle. Let's talk about the ice-breaking element for a second, because this is the piece that has people calling this whole thing an Arctic ice bridge. Hudson Bay freezes over from roughly December through June. That means for more than half the year, ships simply cannot get through. But what if you had specialized icebreakers, purpose-built vessels that could carve a navigable channel through that frozen bay all year long? Suddenly, Churchill stops being a seasonal port and becomes something entirely different. It becomes a year-round Arctic gateway. The Arctic Research Foundation is currently partnering with Arctic Gateway Group and FedNav to examine exactly what combination of icebreakers, ice tugs, and research vessels would make that possible, and what it would cost. This is not a fantasy. This is an active feasibility study with real money behind it. And then there's the road. If you've never thought about what it means for a community to have absolutely no road connection to the outside world, just sit with that for a moment. Churchill is a functioning Canadian town, and yet if you want to get there by ground, the only option is train. That's it. Building an all-weather highway connection doesn't just make life easier for residents, it fundamentally changes the economics of everything. Construction costs drop. Maintenance costs drop. The entire logic of northern development shifts. This road alone would be transformational, and it's just one of 4 pieces. Now, here's what makes this moment different from all the previous times people have talked about Churchill's potential, and there have been many. The ownership structure. Arctic Gateway Group, the organization that owns the Port of Churchill, the Hudson Bay Railway, and the Churchill Marine Tank Farm is an indigenous-led business with up to 41 First Nations and Northern community shareholders. That is not a small detail. That changes the legal landscape, the political dynamics, and the public support in ways that previous attempts at Churchill development never had. When former Assembly of First Nations National Chief Ovid Mercredi joined the Arctic Gateway Board in January 2026, it added real institutional credibility and weight to what was already becoming a serious operation. The money flowing in confirms how serious this has gotten. Since 2018, the federal government has invested over $320 million in the Hudson Bay Railway and Port of Churchill. Manitoba has committed $140 million in capital upgrades since 2022, and in November 2025, Ottawa committed another $175 million package through 2030. That's not planning money, that's building money. But maybe the single most striking development came in March 2026, when the port of Antwerp-Bruges, one of the largest ports in the entire world, handling nearly 300 million tons of cargo every single year, signed a partnership agreement with Arctic Gateway Group to develop a North Atlantic trade corridor between Churchill and Europe. Read that again. One of the world's biggest ports signed a deal with a small, indigenous-owned port in northern Manitoba because they see what's coming. Churchill offers the shortest maritime route from the Canadian prairies to European markets. That's just geography. That's a fact that doesn't change. And right now, with European energy buyers scrambling to restructure supply after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and with Middle Eastern alternatives constrained by tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, the idea of a direct northern export route for Canadian LNG becomes very, very attractive. Manitoba's premier has publicly talked about a target of making Churchill an LNG export hub by 2030. Pipeline plans connecting Western Canadian energy production to Churchill's marine terminal are already circulating in development circles. None of this is without controversy, and it would be dishonest not to mention it. Hudson Bay is one of Canada's most ecologically sensitive marine environments. Year-round commercial shipping introduces noise, fuel spill risks, and ecological disruption to a region whose marine mammals and seabird colonies are already under stress from climate change. A pipeline through northern Manitoba would route through permafrost and watershed systems that are already responding in unpredictable ways to warming temperatures. Environmental organizations and researchers have raised these concerns publicly, and they are legitimate. The feasibility studies being launched now are designed to assess exactly these risks, but those assessments take time, and the pressure to move fast is building. On April 14, 2026, the governments of Canada and Manitoba signed a new framework agreement designed to speed up major project approvals by running federal and provincial reviews simultaneously rather than sequentially. Port of Churchill Plus is a direct beneficiary of this new system. Transport Minister Stephen McKinnon has been explicit. Churchill is set to play a central role in Canada's vision for a stronger, more resilient economy better connected to global markets. What is unfolding here is the convergence of geopolitical pressure, indigenous economic leadership, federal and provincial investment, private sector interest, and international partnership, all pointing at the same spot on the map. A small town on Hudson Bay that most Canadians have never visited and couldn't quite place on a map. The icebreakers are being designed, the railway upgrades are being specified, the road is being planned, the energy corridor is being mapped, and one of Europe's biggest ports is already at the table. Canada's Arctic future might be getting built right now, and almost no one saw it coming.